Right.
Today, February 9th, 2006, we have Dave Christensen with us to continue the oral history collection for the UAH Space Archives. I'm Charles Lundquist. Dave, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
One of the earliest and largest collections in the Space Archive is the Saturn V collection. I know you were instrumental in its creation, but before we get to the Saturn V collection, for the record, can you give us a brief summary of your career?
Sure, be glad to. I'll try to keep it brief, but it does cover, as yours, over 50 years.
Yeah. Take as much time as you need.
Okay. Actually, I guess you could say I started my career in rocketry when I was drafted in the Army back in March 1953. And at that time, I took my basic at Fort Bliss, Texas, and I left from Shreveport, although I was raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And then I went out there and took basic and then went through the Guided Missile School and ended up in the 259th Missile Battalion, which was the first corporal battalion getting ready to go overseas with nuclear warheads. This was right at the end of the Korean War, so the Cold War was still going full blast. The corporal was the American version of a ballistic missile, and it was developed outside the origins of the V-2 program and the von Braun program, primarily under von Karman, Theodore von Karman, in Jet Propulsion Labs. So it was an all-Army U.S. program. And my job was to be on the launch crew and try to get 4 in a row of these things launched so the whole battalion could go to Germany with their nukes and stand off the Russians. So this was certainly getting right into the middle of things. And we were successful in doing that. I didn't go overseas with the battalion, but I went back to Alabama and worked for a while in the aircraft industry. And I was a member of the Institute of Aeronautical Sciences, Aerospace Sciences. And then joined the von Braun team exactly 50 years ago this week.
Really?
Yeah. February. When APMA started, I started. Same week, and that was this week. So
a timely interview then.
Timely interview. 50 years in Huntsville. And the first person I went to see was Walt Weisman, who was sort of the young spokesman for the von Braun team. And I asked him what was going on up here and would be something I would be interested in. And he said, indeed. And so within a matter of days, I was working in the Structures and Mechanics Labs, which is part of the ABMA group under Mr. Willie Motzik and Mr. Widener, and I worked for Mr. Paul, Hans Paul. My first job was to support the Jupiter program, which was just cranking up, and I was involved in developing the thrust vector control system, which used a gimbal engine, which the Germans had not used before. They'd always used jet vanes. So I worked on that system, and then was heavily involved in improving the S3D engine, which was actually out of the Air Force from the Navajo and Thor programs, and making that a reliable rocket engine. So that was part of my main activity at that time. And then I was involved in stripping that engine down and converting it to the Saturn engine. And it had many control valves and functions that we were able to eliminate and simplify then for the H-1, which became the Saturn I and 1B engine. And then I was doing this work as a consultant even then. Then I started my own consulting firm, and for several years represented many major corporations here in Huntsville. Started several companies and ended up with about 138 people supporting all phases of the Saturn program. And one of the things we did at the request of Dr. von Braun and others was to go out and look at management techniques. And we went out and went to different companies to see how they manage major programs. And the one that we ended up with was a chemical company, DuPont. And DuPont had been using very large boards to keep up with programs for 50 years. And we used that technique. And all the management information centers and control rooms were based on 50-year-old management techniques.
I never heard that.
They came right out of DuPont.
I never heard that history. I've seen the boards, of course.
And then our people helped keep those up. And Dr. Art Rudolph certainly was a proponent of that. He said, we all have to sing from the same sheet of music. So what we did is provided the same sheet of music. So everyone in a room could see what was going on and keep up. It was a lot of work because this is before computers. So all those changes had to be done manually, just like they've been done for 50 years. But that's how we set up that management control center. That was just a little interesting project among many, many others. Mm-hmm. And then the Saturn program the engineering part was somewhat shutting down and closing down in the mid-'60s, even though that was before we went to the moon. And I was approached to join the university as a consultant because Dr. Eugene Emmy wanted to do a history of the Saturn program. And
he was at NASA headquarters.
Yeah, he was the chief historian.
Yeah.
So I was hired by Dr. Herman, right here at the Research Institute, as a consultant, to come in and help write the proposal and respond to that request. And so I was named the first acting principal investigator. And what we had to do then is to go out and get all the documents and find historians for the project. That was not easy. For two reasons. There weren't many that really had an interest in technology history. And we had several top historical professor consultants helping us find the historians. And we interviewed a number of them. And that went on for some time. In the meantime, I was chartered to go around the country and visit all of the facilities where the Saturn program was still in production. The Cape and North American, McDonnell Douglas, Michoud, as well as, of course, Huntsville, and started setting up both interviews and gathering documents. And it was very worthwhile we did that because in 67, 68, these engineering people were leaving in droves and they were throwing things away, so we were fortunate to collect all these documents. There's about 1,600 of them.
These were just oral interviews, is that
No,
right?
no, these were documents.
No.
There were interviews.
The interviews.
There were interviews, but
were just oral, not video.
Yeah, that's right. And these interviews were selective with Von Braun and Dr. Rudolph and a few key people until we got the chief historian later, Roger Bilstein. And then he made a lot more of the interviews in depth and spent another 8 years on the project. And the documents in the meantime left Huntsville that we had gathered, and they were in file drawers that would fill this room up at that time. And then when he moved to Houston to work at the University of Houston, and so he took the files with him in order to continue the history. So all those documents were in Houston for a number of years.
At the university.
At the university. And they also have all the archives there for the Apollo program, which are being used today. They are extensively being used. And that's at Clear Lake. University of Houston Clear Lake has those archives. And then the archives here were returned, and over a period of time they've been upgraded and put back in their original state so that you can locate them. But there's about 200 subcategories. And we had an excellent lady, Mrs. Childress, that helped with all the abstracting and compiling. Those documents were set up chronologically, and that was my idea, so that if you knew the date of the document, you could go to the files and quickly locate it, regardless of the author or the title or anything else. If you just had a reference to the date, that became its number, and you could locate it. And we've kind of been following that, I think, at the archive since then as a way to locate things. Anyway, it was a challenge, and it's worthwhile. And even as we speak, we're being asked by NASA people working on the new space exploration program to come and use these archives. And Steve Cook, who is head of that whole program at Marshall, has been invited to come out, and he's particularly interested in the J2 engine, which is being resurrected for the new upper stages of both the crew launch vehicle and the cargo launch vehicle. And
well, I want to come back
also the S-4B, because top stage is a lot like an S4B with a single J2. So there's a lot of interest now in the technology and the archives that we have here.
I want to come back to the Saturn V collection, but why don't you continue with your career after you got that done?
Okay. I did a lot of other stuff, too.
Yeah, you did. I know.
We're still in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then about 19, well, my career at UAH continued, and it continued particularly with the subjects of environmental and energy research. And I helped establish the Center for Environmental and Energy Research, which later became the Johnson Center, named after Dr. Ken Johnson, who became the center director later. Before that, he was on the city council here in Huntsville, and he worked for Roman Haas, so he had a technical background. And then also he worked in Montgomery with the State Industrial Board, so he had quite a career himself. And he passed away, and we named it the Johnson Center. But at the center, we built up extensive solar energy research facilities, and I headed that activity. And people like Bob Middleton was doing a lot of work at NASA, supported by the Department of Energy. So in those days, in the 70s, there was a lot of effort to try and establish alternate energy systems, much as we're hearing today. 30 years later, we're still hearing the same song. We got to get off our addiction to oil and change our energy. But anyway, that became a very large program, and some of the things we did, even people like Ernst Stuhlinger had retired from NASA, Marshall, and he worked with me on setting up a workshop for all the states of the Union to come to Huntsville and set up solar energy policy for the whole country. And that was a major, major undertaking. We also went around the country and had meetings and workshops and seminars on the program that NASA was engaged in. And that involved several hundred solar houses and buildings all over the country.
Well, on another occasion, we'll have to go into all of that in more depth.
Yeah, and I happened to find something Bob gave me that I'm going to bring in, which is probably the only database in the world of every one of those projects, with pictures.
Well, that's very interesting.
You remember that? I didn't throw it away. Anyway, that whole program is very interesting. And later, I joined Wiley Laboratories because they were doing a lot of the commercial solar testing. And I was asked by Congress to give testimony, which I did at the Knoxville World's Fair, on how to develop an alternate energy research and development program. That was in the 70s. And it hasn't changed, so the program plan is still good. We just haven't done it.
There's probably a slot for you in Washington. Get in touch with the right people these days.
Well, we
need to be Secretary Christensen.
No, but anyway, just to make that close the story at UAH, I did hold the record for the most research at that time that was held at the university. And I had many students and people like Sue Weir worked on that program, and Valerie Sequist worked on that program. And we established the State Climatic Center right here, and now the National Climatic Office is here, but that was started during that program. And the solar and wind program was very exciting, and a lot of people worked on that, and a lot of students cut their teeth on that here. In fact, we were doing a database looking at utility rates all over the country, and Sue Weir had 24 students gathering that data for a super large computerized database in order to use that, in order to see where alternate energy makes sense based on utility rates. After that, at Wiley, then I got heavily involved in the space station program and was involved in what became Space Station Freedom. Well, starting in '84, and Luther Powell started it up. I worked very closely with the Marshall people on Space Station, and of course that's still going. And then the shuttle cranked up, and I was involved in that. So I've literally worked in every program: Corporal, Redstone, Jupiter, Saturn, 1B5, Skylab, Space Station, and now this new program. So I haven't really quit yet.
It's a remarkable history, to say the least.
Yeah, and it's been very exciting, and I still do a little work as a consultant. I'm starting to work now with NASA headquarters, to review all their exploration program and help to identify ways to reduce costs, particularly with more operational efficiencies. In other words, we're looking at ways to redesign systems and make them more cost-effective.
That's through a group that was a volunteer group.
That's a volunteer group that I've headed up called the Space Propulsion Synergy Team. And that's now cranking up to this new assignment. And I'll be working on that as a volunteer.
Going back to the Saturn V collection, who was it at Marshall that had the foresight to suggest that the collection be made? Do you know?
I think it was the historian Dave Akins. He was the first kind of program manager over that contract. So Dave Akins had been working on illustrated chronologies, and Dave is still around. He's had his own publishing company, but he was the key guy at Marshall that really started that. And Dr. Von Braun took a very personal interest in it. And I still have the letters that were sent out that we were doing this and to cooperate. So all the doors were open. We had tremendous cooperation with NASA and all the industrial firms.
Who was the Saturn program manager at that time?
Probably Bob Lindstrom, I think, about that time, yeah.
So this preceded, say, Apollo Soyuz.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this was like, again, the engineering was going away when we started the program. And it's a good thing we went in and grabbed the documents when we did. And a lot of the documents are technical papers that have a lot of insights on decisions, trades, why things were done that way. And that's very valuable today, going through the same sequence of events of the new program.
Every now and then somebody comments or inquires about the status of the drawings from the Saturn program. Can you shed any light on that whole matter?
I think NASA has a lot of the drawings. Boeing went out and got a lot of those together. North American and Rocketdyne have a lot of the drawings. A lot of those were considered for rebuilding the Saturn V right after Challenger went down. If you remember, there was a program called Jarvis after one of the deceased astronauts that worked for Boeing, and they were going to rebuild it. So a lot of that was gathered. A lot of it's over in Atlanta in the warehouses. A lot of the schematics and drawings we have here, not all of them. The Space and Rocket Center has some, so it's kind of scattered around. But the only thing that's of interest at the moment is primarily the J2 and the S4B as being most applicable. And incidentally, I saw a chart this week of the three vehicles, the CEV crew launch vehicle, which will use a single SRB. This is a shuttle-derived vehicle. And then the next one is the crew launch vehicle, which has an external tank with 5 shuttle SSMEs and 2 strap-ons and then upper stage. And it was sitting right next to Saturn V, and they were almost identical in weight, size, and capability.
Really?
So in essence, we're bringing back the equivalent of a Saturn V with the cargo launch vehicle. And I'll get that chart. We want to post it out here.
Yes, we should.
Yes, because a lot of that historical data is of interest again. I might mention, after I left Wiley, I went to work at United Technologies and worked for them on the Shuttle C program, which was also a shuttle-derived project, and worked extensively on the design and engineering of that program. And then Wiley wanted me back, and so I went back to them and worked on a couple of payloads for you.
Right.
Went up on the space station.
Right.
In the Space Hab.
I remember that.
And I want to interview you on that whole story of what the university did in the commercial launch program. I think that's a great story.
Well, we'll need to do that.
And I still brag on you to everybody that you sent up more sounding rockets than anybody. So
I
anyway,
had fun.
Yeah, I know. So that's another interview. And then I was actually kind of retired about 10 or 12 years ago for a short period and did a few consulting things. And then I got a call from Lockheed here in town, and they needed some help and hired me as a consultant. And that led to another 7 or 8 year career, very exciting career with Lockheed Martin on a variety of programs, including the Bantam, the fast track engine, I worked with the Skunk Works on several very exciting programs that I can't even tell you about. One of them I can tell you about. It was to modify the D-21 drone, which flew across Asia a few times, and convert it to a high-speed test bed. It was a Mach 3, originally to fly off of the Blackbird, and later it was launched from a B-52. But I was program manager for a project to convert that to a Mach 7 test bed, which you could recover. Not the X-43, which went off in the Pacific Ocean, and that program was a Mach 7, but it only lasted about 5 seconds. So what we were trying to do is extend that. And the reason the program didn't go, the Draco engine that was to be available for that never materialized. We could have done it. But I did the whole study working with the Skunk Works to modify it and convert it over to a very interesting test bed. But that was a very exciting project at Lockheed Martin. And then I worked also on the design of the propulsion system for the flyback booster, which would replace the solids. And for that, we used a big Russian engine, which is used in the Atlas V. And incidentally, it was tested here at Marshall by Lockheed Martin. We actually hired NASA facilities and used those for proving out that engine, which has proven to be very reliable. And we were going to put 4 of those on each side of the shuttle with liquid rockets with wings and jet engines, and literally fly the shuttle off and then fly these things back and land them. And that was a very exciting program.
That would have been a spectacular enterprise.
Yeah, right. So I was right in the middle of that as the propulsion lead for Lockheed Martin. So I had a very good time at Lockheed. And other projects, but I won't go into those.
I know you've collected documents from many of the projects you've been involved in and other space matters in general. You care to comment on your collection?
I have a lot of documents of things that did or didn't happen, like the National Launch System, Shuttle C, which I worked on directly, the other launch systems that have been come and gone with both DOD and NASA. And a lot of that space transportation history, which I plan to put here at the university to complement the Saturn. But a lot of these programs, even though they never flew, there's a lot of good information and technology that might be available, for someone to use. So, and space station documents I have, and schematics and things like that. There's a lot more out there that I hope to help collect that I think are one of a kind that probably still reside in people's basements or attics or something.
Yeah.
Including yours.
Yeah. I have some, yes.
Yeah, right. So together, hopefully, we can pull these in and start really fleshing all that out.
Did you see the Russian press release recently on their thoughts about where a space station should go?
Probably not. What's their latest thinking?
Well, they're talking about using it as a base, a port for missions further into the solar system.
They need to move it then. It's not in the right plane. It should be more equatorial. Yeah,
I understand.
Right. Yeah, so could we move it from where it is to a better location for that?
Well, if you launch at the right time, you get most of that. You don't leave on a equatorial orbit, but once you get away from the Earth a ways, it won't make much difference.
Right. Incidentally, I did work on an extremely interesting project at Lockheed Martin for a Mars cycler between Earth and Mars, that you would have to have a sprint vehicle to catch up with the, let's call it a space station that's in permanent orbit between Earth and Mars. Mm-hmm. You hitch a ride and you get off, and somebody else hitches a ride and comes back. So this would be a continuous cycling system that actually I worked a little bit with Oberth, and Buzz Aldrin also worked on this to some extent. So it's not a new idea.
Be in the eccentric orbit.
Yeah. And other ideas I worked on are space elevators, tethers, which you've worked on. So there's a lot of way out ideas that someday maybe we'll do. I don't know if you and I live to see them, but it's still fun stuff.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add to the interview before we close it?
just to say I hope we're on track now and we're not on another kick to go off and start a big program, and when the cost comes in for doing all this stuff, we usually shut it down. So hopefully if we can sustain some level of funding, we actually will go back to the moon and eventually to Mars. And I might add, at ABMA, we had plans to do both of those. First of all, a 14-man outpost on the moon was designed under Medeiros' direction, as you well know, in the 50s. And then when we went to the moon, we already had a plan to be on Mars in 82. So all those plans are available too, which we hope to put over here at the library, because I do have those.
Well, thank you very much for being here today.
Okay.
We'll have to continue on some of the other topics later.
Yeah, we'll have to interview each other again. Tethers,
All right.
sounding rockets. I've got 2 more on you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.